I've kind of organized the class. Everything is kind of like a hierarchy, okay? It's like I get a prerequisite. And as you're going to see, I'm going to cover this one first because I believe as believing parents, if we don't get that one right, then all the rest of the things we're going to be talking about the rest of the time all shakes out in the end. It won't make any difference. And then the second thing I cover is also important. In other words, you can't do this until you've done this. Unless you get the first two things I'm going to be talking about, then the rest of it really doesn't matter. You can do a great job on all this stuff, but it doesn't matter. If you all remember the verse that says, what does it profit a man if he gains the world but loses his soul? You know, you can gain the whole world, but if you haven't taken care of the soul issue, in the end, it doesn't matter. And so that's kind of where these issues are. They're going to be very important issues. They are important enough that I'm going to spend probably the first 3 to 4 weeks just getting these, because I want to make sure we got these down real solid before we move on to anything else. By the time we inherited our 4 kids, and for those of you that don't know, our 4 children are adopted, and when we got them, the twins, the boy and the littlest girl, were just babies. Then Samantha was about 2 years older, and Megan was about 2 years older than that. And so they were like 0, 2, and 4. And by the time they actually were living with us full time, they were 1, 3, and 5. And currently they are 13, 15, and 17. So they've been around a while. And we are coming up on February 4th where we'll be celebrating the anniversary of their legal adoption. And I lose track, dear. It's like 3 years, 4 years now. Like time goes when you're having fun. But they were with us for so many years before we actually got that taken care of. I want to read a little thing to kind of set the tone for the class by Dr. William Cosby. Does anybody know who Dr. William Cosby is? Let me give you his other name, the comedian Bill Cosby. Yes, most people don't know he does have a doctorate in education and is better known in most of his formal talks as Dr. William Cosby and does a lot of speeches in that capacity. This talk here that he gave was about the creation. He started with the beginning of creation on the first day, and he came down through the first, second, third, fourth, fifth day, and he gets to the 6th day. I thought about playing the tape, but it would have taken almost the whole hour, and I thought, well, what I'll do is I'll just read the cogent part of it here. As he gets down in his talk, he begins to talk about the creation of Adam and Eve. And I'm going to pick up there and take it through. Now, Bill Cosby, I don't even know if he's a believer or not, and as we go through this, I understand some of his theology is a little off here. He hasn't quite read the text correct, but that's okay. The essence of what I want to say is going to come through in it. He comes to this part, and this is Dr. Cosby talking now. He says, after creating in heaven and earth, God created Adam and Eve. And the first thing he said was, don't. Don't what? Adam replied. Now think of your kids as I go through this, okay? It'll help. Don't eat the forbidden fruit, God said. Forbidden fruit? We got forbidden fruit? Hey, Eve, we got forbidden fruit. No way. Yes, way. Don't eat the fruit, said God. Why? Because I am your father and I said so, said God, wondering why he hadn't stopped with the elephants. A few minutes later, God saw his kids having an apple break, and he was angry. Didn't I tell you not to eat the fruit? The first parent asked. Adam replied. Then why did you? I don't know, Eve said. She started it, Adam said. Did not. Did too. Did not. Having had it with the two of them, God kicked them out of the garden and told them to be fruitful and multiply. This was not a blessing, it was a curse. So they left the garden, and they had 2 fruits, Cain and Abel. Thus the pattern was set and has never changed. But there is reassurance in this story. If you have persistently and lovingly tried to give your children wisdom, and they haven't taken it, don't be too hard on yourself. If God had trouble handling his children, what makes you think it's going to be a piece of cake for you? You get the point. And I might add to that, good advice for parents. If you have a lot of tension and you get a headache, do what it says on the aspirin bottle. Take 2 and keep away from children. I might point out when you look at it, you have God, and he has twins, Adam and Eve. Unlike our kids, these are the perfect kids, because they are the only children who did not have a sin nature. So you have the perfect parent, two perfect kids. With us, we have imperfect parents, imperfect kids, and yet somehow we expect to get through this whole thing unscathed. When we have the perfect parent with two perfect kids, and they still messed up. So one thing I've learned about raising kids, I don't know of any parents who have gotten through this whole process with their kids turning out exactly the way they hoped they would turn out. There's always somewhere something just doesn't work, and we're going to look at why that actually happens. There's a good reason for it. Now, I don't know how many of you have heard my tape on God and quantum physics. I'm not going to give you the whole hour-long thing here, but I'm just going to give you a little piece of it. In other words, I'm not going to tell you how I arrive at this conclusion. You'll have to listen to the tape to figure out how I get there. You'll just have to trust me right now that what I'm telling you is the truth. Quantum physics is a relatively new science, and it's beginning to let us know kind of possibly maybe what is going on and how the universe was actually created and all this. I might say that quantum physics, the people who are in quantum physics, on the leading edge of quantum physics, do not believe in evolution. None of them. They all believe in a creator God. Now, about 80% of them are pantheists, and so when I say they believe in a creator God, you understand that's not the creator God. The believing quantum physics people believe in the creator God. The others believe in a creator God. But nonetheless, they all believe that the universe was created in an instant not that long ago. And none of them believe in evolution. And you ask them why they know this, they'll say, well, because we can prove it mathematically. Einstein once said, anybody who believes in evolution doesn't understand the problem. And he was talking about a mathematics problem. In other words, he could prove mathematically that it could not be the case. And so your leading scientists, especially in the area of quantum physics, get this. But one of the things that I talk about on the tape is an author by the name of James Michener. Does anybody know who James Michener is? Anybody ever heard of the story Centennial? It was made into a movie. James Michener was the author of Centennial. And Centennial is a story that starts way back in the late 1700s and comes all the way up through 1973, and you go through generation after generation after generation of a number of families. It's a very extensive story. A great history of the state of Colorado. If you want to study the history of Colorado, if you're homeschooling, get the whole series Centennial, show it to your kids, and call it your history on Colorado. It's excellent. Uses fictional characters, but the historical facts are correct. Well, when James Michener wrote that story, if you can imagine him, he puts the story together first up here in his head. He's got the whole thing laid out. He begins to write that story. He puts it down. He goes through a first draft. All authors go through this process, a first draft, second draft, third, and as he gets there, he goes, well, I don't like this. It doesn't really work. I think I'll have this character do this instead. And finally, he gets it the way he wants it. It's perfect. And so what does he do? What did James Michener do when he got his story perfect? He published it, right? Now, you understand that once he published that story, he couldn't change it? Once he published it, that's the way it was. And to a certain extent, quantum physics indicates that maybe that's what went on with God. God got a story. It went through all the rewrites, and at some point he published the story. And probably, if there is such a thing as a Big Bang, that would have been it. That would have been boom when the whole universe came into existence as God published his story. And like the creation, I've heard Pastor Mark say many times, when God got the creation on that sixth day, he got it and it was perfect. That's when he rested. Because to do any more, if you got perfect and then you change it in any way, it now becomes imperfect. So God got his story and it was perfect. And so he published it. And just like James Michener, if you look at James Michener in the story, when he has certain characters, my favorites are McKeag and Pasquinel at the beginning of the story, and they exist right there in their little, if this is the whole story, they exist right here. That's the only place they exist. And then they die, and their kids die, and their kids take over, and the story goes on through the couple centuries, as a matter of fact. The characters exist there. But let me ask you this. Where, in the story of Centennial, where did James Michener exist? Yeah, even before. He would know the pre-story of Pasquinel and McKeag, who are already grown men when the story starts, but he knew the front story on that of how he developed that character. And then he exists all the way through the story, doesn't he? And then he exists at the end, because he's got the end story. Because even when the story ends here, he knows where those characters are going. That way he knows he gets the end right. So James Michener existed before the story, after the story, and at every point throughout the story. And the whole story was where? The beginning, the end, and before. It was all up here in his head. And so now quantum physics is indicating to us that probably rather than God being here and going whoom and creating the universe out here, that actually the universe probably exists in his mind. And I don't have time to go into some of the verses I do in the tape. There's verses in the Bible that actually would indicate that. When you look at it that way, they all of a sudden start to make sense. Oh, I get it. So God publishes the story, but God does something in his story that James Michener could not do in his story. No human author can do this. God gave each individual person or each individual character in his story the ability to write their own part. And what do we call that? Free will. He gave his characters free will so that they could write their own part in the story. In Romans 8:29, it says, "For whom he did foreknow, he also did predestinate to be conformed to the image of his Son, so that he might be the firstborn among many brethren. Moreover, whom he did predestinate, them he also called," and so on. We got that word predestinate. There's whole denominations built on this whole idea of predestination. Lots of arguments going on it. But when you look at it in the sense that God wrote the story, he's got the story up here, he gets it all right, all the characters write their own parts, he gets it right, he publishes it. At that point, the story's perfect, right? Once the story's perfect, can you or I change it? Can God change it? God wouldn't change it even if he could, because he didn't publish it until it was what? Perfect. So why would he change it and make it imperfect? So consequently, once the story's published, your part, my part, and everybody's part in the story is predestined. It's going to go down the way it was written when he published it. Does that make sense? Now, do we know for sure that that's the way it actually is? No, but science is beginning to indicate that just maybe it's something like that. In Genesis 1:26, it says, "And God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness." Last January, I took the Hebrew class here at the Harvest. And I got a program on the computer where I was learning some words, kind of like a flashcard program. It keeps throwing the word up there until you get it right a number of times. And this one word kept coming up, damut. And it said it was likeness, like in a play or a movie was the definition. And I finally learned that word. And just about the time it was ready to disappear off the list, I got to thinking, I wonder if that's the word that's used when it says, let us make man in our own image. So I went over into my Bible program, and I typed in the word likeness. I looked it up, and then I kicked on the Strongs to see what the word was, and sure enough, there it was, damut. I thought, wow, isn't that something? Now, what's just interesting is right at the same time I was doing this, most of you know who Raymond and Rudy are. Raymond and Rudy had been over to the house, and we had just watched Coal Miner's Daughter and Ray. And in Coal Miner's Daughter, Sissy Spacek plays the part of Loretta Lynn. She does it so well. If any of you have ever seen that movie, when you watch that movie, you don't really see Sissy Spacek. Who do you see? Loretta Lynn. That's who you see. Good character actors can do that. Those are the kind of performances that get Oscars. When they play it so well that you don't see the person playing it, you see the part they're playing. And we followed that up with Ray, and Jamie Foxx plays Ray. How many of you have ever seen that movie? I mean, you don't see Jamie Foxx, do you? You see Ray Charles. I mean, just as plain as day. And so, looked at this verse again. It says, let us make man in our image after our demut. And I suddenly realized that, wow, if we could get in a time machine and go back to the garden prior to the fall, we would get out of our time machine and we'd start going through the garden and we'd find God walking in the garden. And we'd go up to him and say, God, hi, where's Adam? And he'd go, well, it's me. We'd go, oh, come on. No, really, come on. Where's Adam? He'd go, no, I'm Adam. You understand what I'm saying? We wouldn't see Adam. We would have seen God. And when he ate that fruit, that's what he lost. No more did anybody look at Adam and see God. They looked at Adam and saw man. That's what Adam means, man. They no longer saw God, they saw man. And we've never gotten that back. I haven't met any human beings. I don't know if any of you have, but I've not met any that when I look at them, I don't see them, I see God. And I've kind of come, since coming to the harvest, I've kind of started to figure this out. That's what following Torah is all about, is trying to get back to that demut of God that we lost. Yet we won't ever get there, of course, until the end when God changes us. But we're supposed to be working towards that. Okay, that's how we're supposed to live. That's how Adam lived. And, of course, he just did it naturally before he ate the fruit. The number one job of parents is to bring our children to the place where they will do something of their own free will. And it's something we all need to do. Because what does God really want from us? He's written the story. He's given each of us the chance to write our own part in the play. But what does he really want? He really wants us to take the pen that we're writing our part in the story with and say, you know, why don't you do it? I'm not doing a really good job at this. Why don't you write my story? And turn back authorship to him. And that's the number one job of parents. That's the A job right here, is to bring our children to the place where they will, of their own free will, return authorship of their life back to God so that they can be conformed to the image of his Son. I shouldn't have to go into all the details, but basically that's a two-part thing. It starts out with justification, right? Salvation. And then sanctification. I'm assuming you all know what those two terms apply to. It's justification, we're saved, and then sanctification is how we live after it. That's our first priority as parents, is to bring our kids to that point. Because of that, and this is what caused Adam and Eve to fall. They did not even have a sin nature. But what got them in a position where they could fall was this thing called free will. God gave them free will. It wasn't a sin nature that caused them to fall. It was their free will that God had given them. And why did God give them that? Yeah. In Marilyn's LTS class last Monday, it was amazing. She was covering some of my notes. And she put this just absolutely beautifully, and that is that God had to give us free will because he didn't want us loving him because we had to. He wanted us loving him because we wanted to. And the only way that could be accomplished is if we had the choice not to. And that's why free will was there. It actually was very important that free will did exist. But free will is the little kicker that's going to get in our way as parents. Because the verse that I picked for this class is the one that says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he'll not depart from it. That is not a 100% guarantee. You all understand that? Because we got free will in there. Do you think God, with his two children, twins, I think, were pretty close to it, did he train those children up in the way they should go? Yeah. And when they were old, they did what? They departed. Yet he did that verse, but there's no 100% guarantee. And why is it? Because each person has free will and a sinful nature. Now, that's why bringing our children up so they're willing of their own free will to turn authorship back to God, because that's the only thing that can battle the free will. You understand? So if our kids don't do that, their free will is going to get them in the same mess that it got Adam and Eve into. Because Adam and Eve, when their free will got them in trouble, is when they decided they wanted to take the authorship back. And they reached up and took the pen from God, and they decided they were going to write their own life. See, as long as they were letting God write it, they were okay. It's when they, of their own free will, took that pen back, that's when free will was able to get them into trouble. So that's why that first step is so important. And I want you to understand there is no guarantee. Because your children have free will. How many of you have seen the movie Bruce Almighty? In there, God comes down and gives Bruce all his powers. He gets to be God for a day. But one of the things God tells Bruce is you can do anything you want, but you can't mess with free will. You can't affect free will. God cannot affect free will. He won't get in the way of free will. And the thing we got to watch, and we'll talk about this a little later, but we don't want to get in the way either. We can't affect our child's free will. God gave them that. God gave them permission to use it. And we're going to see how we as parents play into that whole picture of trying to get them to use their free will correctly. So each person has the ability and God's permission to control our own pen. We have the ability and we have God's permission, if we choose to control our own pen and write our own story. And so do our kids. How many of you have ever heard this? Too bad children don't come with an instruction manual. People say they don't come with an instruction manual. Actually, they do. Yeah, there it is. Yeah. Torah is the instruction manual. And we're going to look at one verse, just one verse, that I'm going to show you that you've never seen probably the way I'm going to show you. It's just something different. How many of you know about this thing called the Ten Commandments? You ever heard of that? I've learned from Norm not to ask people to name them. You can get in trouble that way or embarrass people. But I will pass on something Norm says. The New Testament model, it says God will write the law on our hearts. And if you can't name the Ten Commandments in any order, if you don't know them, then God hadn't written it on your heart. There's a problem there, okay? We'll leave it at that. The first one is what? Yeah, no other gods. The second one, there you go. Idols. And then what? His name. Has to do with his name being used in vain. And then what was the next one? This is the important one. We're doing it today. Remember the Sabbath? And the next one has to do with parents and children. Honor your parents. 6 has to do with murder. The next one has to do with adultery. And the next one has to do with what? Stealing. Did any of you see the sign on that church up on the corner? It said, "Thou shalt not steal because stealers lose." Okay. For those of you who like football, you probably understand it better than I do. The next one is lying, and then the covet. The interesting thing here, how many of you ever heard this? The first 4 have to do with the relationship of man to God, and then these have to do with man's relationship to man. Anybody ever heard that? I want to talk a little bit about this commandment right there. It is going to blow your mind how much about children is wrapped up in there. And I'm going to pass out a little handout. This is ranks in the Air Force, and you're going to want to know, what in the world does this have to do with children? Absolutely nothing. Except that I'm going to use it as an example to graphically show something. You're supposed to, when you teach, you're always supposed to tell a story or something along the way. So this gives me a chance to kind of tell a story and get the story out of the way. So I at least do one story during the whole hour. This is a true story. One day, when I was in the Air Force, and I worked in a lab, I wore a white lab coat, worked in a lab that was in an air-conditioned, heated building with an airlock on it. It was pressure-controlled, heat-controlled, clean environment, clean room. One day, the guy who ran our lab, who was a master sergeant, said, "You need to report tomorrow to this building up the street." And so I get up there, and here is this staff sergeant. Now, I want to just talk about where he falls in the whole thing. If you look at the list, You'll notice starting over here, you got airman. That's what I was. Actually, I was an airman first class. I had 2 stripes. A staff sergeant is just 2 down the row from now. Now, if you'll notice, there's a whole bunch of higher-ranking guys, right? You flip that over, you got your officers. They're even above that. You see the one down there on the end that says colonel? We called those guys bird colonel. Can you guess why? A bird colonel was our base commander. To put that so you understand who this guy was, on our base, the bird colonel was God. He ruled the base. And then he's passing the orders down through all these other ranks. And finally, it gets to the staff sergeant. There's a bunch of little 1 and 2 stripers standing there, and we're getting these orders from the staff sergeant. Now, you understand, in the scheme of things, this staff sergeant ain't that much different than us. When you look at all the rank above, I mean, we're all kind of like down at the bottom of the pecking list here. He's just a little higher peon than we are. And this little higher level peon than us is telling us what we're going to do. He is going to divide us up into teams of 3. Give us trash bags, and we're going to walk up and down the streets of the base and pick up trash. How humiliating can that be? That's what they have criminals do, out in the world. They pull us off of important jobs, in labs, and they got us out there walking around in the hot sun at 98 degrees with 102% humidity, and we're picking up trash on main drag going down the base, where everybody can see you out there picking up trash and wondering what that idiot did wrong. I was just like, oh, you got to be kidding me. But I did it. Let's just suppose that I had gone up to that staff sergeant and said, you know what, you idiot, if you think I am going to go out there and pick up trash, I got a job, an important job to do back over this lab. It's important to the mission of the Air Force. If you want the trash picked up, tell you what, you pick it up yourself, okay? I'm going back to work. Bye. And I turned around and went on back to work. What would have happened to me, do you think? Yeah, what do you think would have happened? Maybe just court-martials come to mind, yeah. Maybe 30 days in the brig, yeah. They send me to jail for disobeying a direct order. Now, let me give you another scenario. This didn't happen. When I got my bag, by the way, I went out and picked up trash. The second time I had to do this was better. We got to go to the marina, so it was nice. But let's just suppose the first time we went up there, I'm standing there going, I got better things to do. I'm out here in the sun. I could be in a nice air-conditioned lab. And let's suppose that staff sergeant had paired everybody up into 3s, and he had 1 left over, and that ended up being me. And so he sent all these guys out, and then he looks at me and he says, here, I got a special job for you to do. Here are the keys to my car. My car is over there. In the back seat of my car are a couple uniforms. They're my uniforms. What I want you to do is take those uniforms to the cleaners and get them cleaned for me. And suppose if he had said that, I looked at him and said, what? Go clean your own uniforms. I'm going back to work. Bye. And I turn around and walk off back to work. What would have happened to me? Not much. Not much. In fact, he wouldn't even dare go tell his superiors what had happened because they might write him up. They probably wouldn't court-martial him, but they'd probably write him up for even telling me to do that. So what makes the difference? Same airman, same staff sergeant. In one case, I go to jail. In the other case, nothing happens to me. Let me put it in real simple terms. The order that this staff sergeant has given to me to go pick up trash, is that something he made up? Where'd that come from? Well, that probably come from somebody with one of these things on their lapel. You understand what I'm saying? Maybe a major. And where did the major get it? Is it just something he made up? Yeah, probably this guy that wears the bird on his shoulders, maybe. And where did he get the idea? Well, chief of staff probably one day got together and said, you know what? We need to make sure our Air Force and Marines and Army bases, they need to be clean and sharp looking. And so they got all their base commanders together and said, you need to keep your bases clean. And so this guy probably got some of these guys together and said, come up with a plan. And they came up with this plan. And so they put it all into effect. And this was part of the plan. And so the staff sergeant's giving me some orders that are coming down from another. In other words, he is acting under authority. Is that clear? So when I tell him what to go do with himself, who am I actually speaking to? The colonel. God, the God of the base, right? I am basically telling that guy what he can do. And that guy at the top takes a real dim view of that. In fact, he takes such a dim view of it that he will send me to the brig for that one. But when the staff sergeant just tells me to go clean his clothes, he's not under authority. So when I tell him what to do, that I'm not going to do it, and I head on back, he's got nowhere to go. You see what I'm saying? Because he has no authority to penalize me because he's not acting under authority. Now, Exodus 20, verse 12. Honor thy father and thy mother. Colossians 3:20. Children, obey your parents in all things. But get this. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 1. Children, obey your parents in the Lord. What does that term, in the Lord, mean in light of what we just talked about? Children are to obey parents who are what? Acting under authority. As a parent, you got to be under the authority of God. Otherwise, believe it or not, your children have the right to tell you what to go do with yourself. And there's nothing you can do about it because you got no higher authority to appeal to. Your children aren't yours. They belong to God. When I was working in the military, I didn't belong to that staff sergeant. I belonged to that bird colonel. I belonged to the chiefs of staff who operate under the authority of the President of the United States, the commander-in-chief. That's who I belong to. You see? So they had higher authority to go because they were operating under authority. A lot of times parents get in trouble because they're trying to tell their kids what to do, and that's why when your kid says, why? And you say, because I said so. That's not a real good answer. And I'm not saying Edie and I get this right a lot of the times, but really, what's the right answer? If we're operating under authority, it's what? Because God said to. You got to do it because God said, not because I said so. Who are you? See, in the scheme of things, God is the bird colonel. You're a staff sergeant. As parents, we're staff sergeants. Our children, they're airmen. They're 1 and 2 stripers. We got 5. But so what? See, we got to be operating under authority. So, I'm going to say this. Because of that, I think this line needs to be down here. This is the man-to-man stuff. That honor your parents is a relationship between man and God. Because, you see, it's the relationship of the airman to the bird colonel, regardless of who might be in between, passing down orders, who are operating under authority. You see what I'm saying? The relationship is to the one granting the authority, not the go-between. So a lot of times we don't understand that, and we get out of line as parents, and then we wonder why things ain't working right. Well, it's not all our kids' fault. Sometimes it's because we're trying to do things that are out of God's will, and our kids really aren't at issue there. Now, let me ask you this. This whole thing of children obeying their parents, which ultimately is what? Obeying God. Is that something serious to God, do you think? How serious is that? Can anybody come up with a verse that would indicate that that is gravely serious? Oh, I got one. I'm just going to throw this out. I'm not going to get into a debate. You got to figure this one out. We always get this question about how much of Torah are we supposed to obey? And I keep hearing the standard answer, well, the sacrifices no longer apply, but everything else does. Try this one on. This is not a sacrifice command. This is not a sacrifice command. But I don't know. This is Deuteronomy 21, verses 18 to 21. If a man have a stubborn and rebellious son which will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and that when they have chastened him will not hearken unto them, then shall the father and his mother lay hold on him and bring him out unto the elders of the city and unto the gate of his place. And they shall say unto the elders of his city, this is our stubborn and rebellious son. He will not obey our voice. And all the men of the city shall stone him with stones that he die, so that thou shalt put evil away from among you, and all Israel shall hear and fear. See, what I discover in that verse is when a child disobeys a direct order from one who is acting under authority, that God takes that just about as serious as that bird colonel on my base would have taken it. In fact, he takes it more serious. The bird colonel would do what? Throw me in jail. God says, Kill him. It's a capital offense. Before we go any further, do you see where being under authority as a parent is critical? And when you're acting under authority, your child obeying you, what percentage of the time should your child obey you? Now, we're looking just at those times that you're under authority. We're not counting the time that you gave your child a gun and told him to go over and kill the neighbor. We're not talking about those times. Just looking at the times that you are acting under authority of God, what percentage of the time should your child obey you? 99% of the time? 100% of the time. Have we made the point that your child obeying you when you are acting under authority 100% of the time is absolutely essential? And any time that that doesn't happen, this commandment is being violated.